Tribulations by Bet Sip and Midnight in Japan. Part 2. He felt warm when he woke up. Not hot, exactly, just a nice snuggly warmth. He felt something like the wind in his hair, but the rustle was too regulated to be the wind. Too regulated and too warm. And there was something heavy on his legs as well. Nico forced his eyes open. For a moment he didn't comprehend what he was seeing. Everything was orange, for some reason. Then he realized he was looking at Percy Jackson's t-shirt and that he had his face buried against his chest. Panicked, he moved backwards, pushing Percy away from him as he rolled off the mattress. The sudden sharp pain in his chest made him realize he'd gone too far. Percy jolted awake with a yell, and Nico hurriedly moved just a little bit closer again to make the pain stop. Percy turned towards him, frowning as he tried to catch his breath from the rough awakening. "What was that for?" he groaned. "Sorry," Nico mumbled, feeling his cheeks grow hot. "I wasn't thinking." "It's fine," Percy said, yawning widely and scratching his head. "Just not a very nice way to wake up, you know." "Sorry," Nico repeated, trying not to look at Percy, trying to forget that he had just woken up next to him. It hadn't exactly been like he'd imagined, in those rare moments he'd allowed himself to imagine anything at all. Part of him wished he'd been able to remain calm and just enjoy lying beside Percy for as long as he could, but it was probably best not to think about that. "You okay?" Percy asked, eyeing him with a worried expression. Nico nodded, willing himself not to blush again. He probably failed. "So, I'm gonna take a shower," Percy said uncomfortably. "If you could, Right," Nico said, getting up and following Percy to the bathroom. The worst part was that the shower was not, in fact, less than 4 feet from the door. Nico's face was burning as he realized this. "I'll just keep my back turned," he muttered, sitting down at the floor. He tried his best not to listen to the rustling of clothes behind him or Percy's soft sigh as the water hit him. Mostly he tried to imagine horrible things to distract himself from the fact that Percy Jackson was standing naked and dripping wet right behind him. Yeah, that was definitely the wrong trail of thought, considering he wouldn't have any privacy at all in the foreseeable future, not even in the shower. He really ought to try and think about something else. The water stopped flowing behind him, and he heard Percy move around, drying himself and putting clothes on. "Okay, your turn," Percy finally said, sitting down on the floor beside Nico, giving him a brief smile. He had a towel around his neck, and his hair was still dripping wet. How was it possible for someone to look so good while wet? It had to be a Son of Poseidon perk. Nico tore his eyes away from him and stood up. He hesitated. He felt really uncomfortable doing this, but on the other hand, he needed a shower, especially a cold shower, badly, and he had already brought clean clothes with him. Sighing, Nico began to undress. Percy kept his back turned, but Nico kept glancing back at him, hyper-aware of his presence. When he got into the shower, he immediately turned the dial to cold, gasping a bit when the icy water hit him. He stayed just long enough to feel clean, but he was still shivering when he got out and quickly got dressed. He had no doubt Percy noticed, but thankfully he didn't say anything about it. "How long do you think we have until the next trial?" Percy asked as they walked to breakfast. Nico shrugged. "There's no way to tell. I kind of hope it'll start soon, though," he said. It was true. Living like this any longer would probably cause him to go crazy and do something stupid, and he didn't want to see Percy's reaction when that happened. Percy had taken everything pretty well so far, but he doubted it would last if Nico actually tried something, which he wasn't going to do, even if he wanted to. "Yeah, me too," Percy nodded. "It's not your fault or anything, but this spell is really wearing me out." They ate breakfast at the Poseidon table, trying to ignore the curious looks the other campers gave them. Nico could see the Aphrodite kids whispering and giggling amongst themselves while looking at them, and he tried not to hate them. Their mother's deeds were not their fault, after all. "So you want to spar or something?" Percy asked out of the blue as they were finishing up. Nico considered this a moment. Getting rid of some energy would probably be a good idea. "Why not?" he said. "Just sparring, though. Using our powers could be dangerous for the both of us in this situation." "Agreed. Just swords, then," Percy said, grinning at him, apparently happy with the prospect of sparring. Nico couldn't help but smile back at him. They never made it as far as the arena. 2 women stood waiting for them at the edge of the forest, and Nico groaned. "Ready for the next trial?" Aphrodite sing-song, smiling happily at them, like she wasn't going to send them to their doom. Percy frowned at them. "Are you going to lift this spell if we do?" he asked. "It's really impractical." "People who love each other are supposed to want to be near each other," Hera said, raising her eyebrows. "Are you giving up?" "No way," Percy said, "but going to the bathroom alone would still be nice, you know."
If your relationship can't withstand proximity, then maybe it isn't so strong after all, Hera said. I think we're ready for the trial,
Nico said hastily because Percy looked like he might say something stupid again and possibly anger the Queen of the Gods. Oh, wonderful, Aphrodite said, clapping her hands together. The scenery changed. Camp Half-Blood melted away, and a large cave appeared. It was brightly lit and about as big as the Poseidon cabin, but Nico couldn't see an exit anywhere. What he could see, however, was a large pile of grain on the floor.
Oh, please, no,
Nico muttered while Percy looked confused.
What are we supposed to do?
Eat that? He asked. Aphrodite giggled.
Of course not. You're going to have to sort it into piles according to what kind of grain it is,
she said.
You did this to Psyche once, Nico said. Why make the same trial twice?
It is a little unoriginal, Aphrodite admitted, but Lady Hera insisted.
A lasting relationship isn't all about being truthful and brave in dangerous situations,
Hera said with a cold smile.
What kills love most easily is the boring everyday tasks. Right, because sorting grain is an everyday task nowadays, Percy scoffed. How am I supposed to know which grain is which anyway? I suggest you talk to your partner, Hera said. You have until dawn tomorrow. That should be plenty of time.
Good luck,
Aphrodite said, and both goddesses disappeared, leaving Nico and Percy alone with a pile of grain.
This is the worst thing they could have come up with, Percy said. Give me a good monster any day. I guess that was the point,
Nico said, sighing deeply as he sat down in front of the pile.
Might as well get started. So you know what's what then?
Percy asked as he sank down beside Nico, picking up a grain from the pile.
Is this wheat? It's barley, you can tell by the spikes, Nico said. We're lucky they're not peeled. That would have been really hard to tell. It's still going to take forever, Percy groaned. How do you know this anyway? Dementor did make good of her threat to make me work at a farm for a time. Nico shrugged. I picked up a thing or two, but it didn't stay long. The grain kept dying on me. I'm not good with plants.
I can't imagine why, Percy laughed. The first few hours went pretty well. They alternated between light conversation and comfortable silence, but after 3 hours on, sitting, still sorting a seemingly never-ending pile of grain, they were both too bored and irritated to say anything. Nico was itching to get up and do something more interesting, and he could tell by the foot restlessly tapping the floor that Percy felt the same. The sound was getting on his nerves.
Would you stop that?
He finally hissed. Percy actually did for a while. Barely 5 minutes later, the tapping started up again. Nico resisted the urge to punch him.
I told you to stop it,
he said louder than had intended. Percy looked at him with a frown, then stood up and stretched.
I can't do this. I need a break, he said, jumping up and down for no reason. Not even halfway yet, and we have a time limit,
Nico pointed out, but he knew he was too fed up with the whole thing to sound convincing.
I know,
Percy said, grabbing Nico's arm and dragging him up. The bones in Nico's legs protested after sitting still for so long.
I'll go crazy if I do that any longer. Come on, spar with me.
Fine, Nico said, glad he still had his sword.
But let's move the grain we've already sorted out of the way first. I do not want to redo it.
After putting the sorted grain into neat piles by the wall of the cave, they moved to the other side and drew their swords. They were still bound to each other and didn't have a lot of room for movement anyway, but the exercise helped clear Nico's mind. Percy was a very skilled swordsman, but Nico could hold his own and was more accustomed to fighting underground. The tension ran out of Nico's body as they fought, and he found himself grinning.
See that? Aphrodite said triumphantly. They don't despair over the menial task, and are keeping each other's spirits up. That is a sign of true love if I ever saw one.
What I see is two boys fighting,
Hera said,
and the task is not yet complete. Undoubtedly they will be fighting with words as well as swords before this is over.
Perhaps, Aphrodite said thoughtfully, but even the greatest relationships have disputes. Wouldn't you agree, my lady?
Hera didn't answer. They had to stop every couple of hours to do something physical. The first time it was sparring. The second time Percy bet that he could do more push-ups than Nico in the same amount of time, which was true. And the third that he could walk on his hands longer, which wasn't. Percy always seemed to be the first to break. He honestly wondered where Nico got his patience from. Even with all the breaks, the trial started to wear on them. The goddesses had provided water, but no food, and they were hungry, tired, and bored out of their minds as evening fell. At least the pile had gotten much smaller by then.
If every trial hereafter is like this one, I'll quit,
Percy said bitterly, then looked at Nico.
No offense. Not taken. Nico said tiredly. I wouldn't hold it against you. Honestly, I'm still surprised you agreed to this at all. Especially after you realized what it was really about. Well, after everything Hera said, why wouldn't I? Percy said. Besides, having her dictate love for the next 1,000 years would be a nightmare. I wonder, Nico muttered. She is the goddess of marriage, after all. She would only pair together people she thinks would make the prettiest babies, Percy said angrily. Though Aphrodite isn't much better. You realize they are probably listening to this right now?
Nico pointed out, and Percy laughed dryly.
That must be more boring than Jason's soap operas, he said. And they deserve to know what we think of them anyway. Well, this pie will never end. There's not that much left, Nico said. At this rate, I think we'll make it, as long as we haven't sorted anything wrong.
They continued in silence for a while.
Can I ask you a question?
Percy said. Nico rolled his eyes.
You just did. Funny, Percy said, smiling slightly. I was wondering, why didn't you tell me who I was when we met at Camp Jupiter?
Nico hesitated.
Hera sent you there for a reason, and without your memory, if I had told you everything immediately, you would have rushed off to Camp Half-Blood and never gone on a quest with Hazel and Frank. I didn't want to interfere in whatever plan she had. It still wasn't a very nice thing to do, Percy said. Was that the only reason? If you're asking if I plan to try and woo you without your memories, the answer is no,
Nico said, smiling bitterly.
It honestly hurt me to see you like that. Besides, you still remembered Annabeth. Oh, Percy said quietly. Sorry. That's fine,
Nico said, but judging by the tone of his voice, it wasn't. Percy decided not to press on. When the last grain was finally sorted, Percy threw himself on the floor, sprawled on his back. Gosh, that took forever, he said. I never want to see any kind of grain ever again in my life.
Agreed,
Nico said,
though I wasn't particularly fond of the stuff before, either.
Percy laughed.
Hey, we're done,
he shouted to the air. Let us out of here.
Well done, boys,
Aphrodite said, appearing from nowhere. She was clapping her hands, looking positively delighted, while Hera stood beside her with a sour expression on her face.
Barely any fighting either. I'm so proud of my champions.
That's great, Percy said. Now take us back to camp.
Aphrodite smiled brightly, and the cave disappeared. They were on the edge to the forest at Camp Half-Blood again.
Do not look so happy about your success. You may yet wish you had failed. The next trial will be harder, and deadly,
Hera said, looking ominous. Percy couldn't bring himself to care.
Sounds fun, he said. Later then.
The goddesses disappeared, and he turned towards Nico.
Let's go grab some food. I'm starving. As long as I don't have to sort it,
Nico muttered, and Percy laughed as they walked back to the dining area. They were just sitting down at the Hades table for dinner when Jason walked into the dining pavilion. He grinned and made a beeline straight for them.
All healed?
Percy asked, grinning at him. Yup, Jason said, flopping down on the bench next to him.
You guys look worn out again. What's going on?
He asked, looking between them. Percy and Nico looked at each other, which only made Jason frown in suspicion.
You said the son of Hermes didn't exist? Tell me what happened. Nico? Can we tell you after?
Nico asked.
We're only sitting together because we have no choice, but Chiron will probably be mad if he catches you.
Jason left reluctantly, and Nico and Percy ate in silence, mostly because Percy couldn't think of anything to say. They had worked well together in the cave, but now everything felt awkward and tense again. Maybe it was because they were back at camp with the curious glances and giggling children of Aphrodite and Ares now. You should have seen that coming. Ares and Aphrodite had a special relationship, and their children got along oddly well. Of course, Cabin 10 gossiped to them. He wanted to talk to Nico about the tension between them. In the cave, he'd started to, after asking him about what happened at Camp Jupiter, but he stopped. Maybe because he was still shocked that Nico had those kinds of feelings for him. He had never suspected, not even for a minute. Maybe it was because they were both boys, and he never thought about it. But also because Nico hid it so well. Knowing everything he'd been through, it was easy to pass his moodiness off as an adaptive trait, but as it turned out, he'd been living with a broken heart. Percy was still angry at himself for not seeing it, and at Aphrodite for middling as much as she had. He had never resolved anything with Reyna or Calypso. Only Rachel remained his friend, and that was only because she realized her calling to be the Oracle. He didn't want to leave Nico to deal with this on his own. He wanted to make it better, which meant he had to force the angry and defensive son of 80s to talk without a magical funhouse. After dinner, Jason found them again, telling Piper he would catch up with her. Her eyes drifted to Percy and Nico, and she looked a bit embarrassed. Percy had to suppress an outburst. Of course Piper knew she was the daughter of Aphrodite and the counselor of Cabin 10, but it looked as if she hadn't told Jason at least, and he was grateful for that. It was also clear that Jason was not going to back off until they told him what was wrong. Percy explained everything about the trials with thinly veiled irritation at the whole setup. "One," Jason said loudly. "Test your affection," he repeated. He looked at both of them, and Percy was sure he could feel the awkwardness radiating off of them. "Oh, gods." "He knows," Nico said flatly, and then he shrugged. Jason's eyes widened, and he quickly glanced at Percy before turning his attention back to Nico. "It was part of trial 2? 3? I've lost count already." Percy sighed. "They stuck us in some weird maze where you have to tell the truth to leave. Thing looked like something out of a bad MGM musical." "Percy, can I talk to Nico alone?" Jason asked. "That might be hard," said Percy sarcastically. "It's part of the trials," Nico said. "We get more than 6 feet from each other, and it feels like our ribs are breaking." "Seriously? So that's why you have to sit together now. Wait, what about other times?" he asked cautiously. "We're attached all the time," Nico said uncomfortably, as Percy shrugged. "This is really messed up," said Jason. He looked at Nico, who tried to smile and reassure him. "I'm okay," he said to Jason. Percy almost choked, holding back his snippy injection of, "Yeah, I'm fine too." He knew this was hard for Nico, and he and Jason were obviously closer than Percy ever knew, but this was a lot for him to take in as well. Aphrodite had turned him into the world's biggest prick, and he supposed he wasn't entitled to any empathy. "But you guys will beat this," Jason said confidently, then hesitated. "What happens if you get through it?" Both of them blushed and did their best not to look at each other. "Something about living happily ever after," Percy grumbled. Is that a good thing?" Jason asked, his eyes darting from Nico to Percy and back again. Percy knew that was code for, "Do you like each other now?" "It's just something we have to get through," Nico said, sounding grouchy. "If we win, they leave us alone. That's how I'm looking at it." That made Percy feel sad and upset with himself all over again for being selfish a second ago. Now that he was paying attention, he could see that it was hurting Nico to be this close to him. He wondered what was going on in the younger boy's head. Jason was looking at Nico with undisguised sympathy. He had been in on this element of Nico's life for a while, and it made Percy feel slow. Percy was struggling to understand him while Jason just did. It only made him more resolved to talk to Nico. They walked slowly to the campfire where Jason said goodbye and went to sit with Piper. He and Nico sat together, but neither joined in with the songs. They stayed locked and said their own thoughts, the only place where they still had any privacy. When it was over and almost time for lights out, they started for the cabins. "Do you want to go to your cabin tonight?" Percy asked. "No, all my stuff is still in yours, so let's just go there. You've already got the mattresses set up too." He didn't sound happy about it, but Percy didn't want to push and start an argument. Inside Percy's cabin, they turned their backs so they could change into sleepwear and then climbed under the sheets. Once again, Nico rolled over to face the opposite direction, and this time he scooted a little further away. Percy propped himself up on his elbow and stared at that head of silky black hair. "Nico?" "About... how you feel, about me?" He could see Nico go rigid underneath the sheets. "I don't want to talk about that," he said, sounding annoyed. "Just go to sleep, Percy." "I can't believe we've gone through all those trials, with more to come, and you still can't just talk to me about this." At first, Nico didn't respond, and Percy was wondering what else he could say to convince him. And then Nico surprised him by rolling over to look at him. The soft glow from the fountain made Nico's eyes seem even darker, and Percy could feel his gaze. It wasn't a bad thing. He'd never been afraid of Nico, and like everyone else, Percy could see enough to tell that he was snuggled under the covers to the point that half his face was hidden. "What do you want me to say?" he asked, his voice sounding muffled by all the material keeping them warm. "You don't understand how hard this is for me," said Nico somberly. "I didn't want anyone to know, especially not you." "It's not... if you've liked me since we met, that's 5 years now."
You've liked me as long or longer than Annabeth, and I just don't see anything about me that would inspire something like that.
He sighed.
Can we please talk about it? I can't just not wonder about this or leave things like they are.
He heard Nico take a deep breath.
What good will it do? It might only make us both feel bad.
Nico said, as if he saw nothing but futility in the subject.
Maybe it'll help us? If this is what's been causing so much trouble between us, then maybe we can finally move past it. And maybe I want that,
Percy said.
I guess there's really no reason to spare myself now.
Nico said, sounding bitter. He sat up and ran a hand through his shaggy hair. He didn't bother to look at Percy, who was staring at his back.
When we met, I was a stupid kid who played mytho magic and dreamed about having superpowers and going on adventures. Then you showed up, fighting a monster right in front of me. I thought you were so cool,
He said sadly.
I screwed up that day. We were saved by the Hunters of Artemis.
Percy corrected him.
The Hunters weren't there in the beginning. You may not have killed that Manticore, but you held it off, and that did save us,
He said.
I didn't see a failure. I saw a hero with, my feelings, how I feel. It was almost instant.
He said.
You were nice, brave, and, I thought you were cute.
He stopped talking, and the muscles in his back looked tense. Percy felt his face heat up and hoped that if Nico did turn around, he couldn't see as well in the dark as he claimed.
Then Artemis and Apollo showed up,
Nico said, carrying on quickly.
Real gods. And they knew your name and looked at you like you were important. I guess it was hero worship, and it was wrong, but I was immature and I didn't know any better. Then Bianca...
He stopped again, and Percy felt his heart sink.
I will never stop being sorry. No, stop apologizing. Bianca was right. I wasn't mad at you. I was mad at her for leaving me, and I was mad at myself for so much. Not being able to stop her, or even help her, and because I honestly wasn't very happy to find out I was the son of Hades. And I was mad because I liked you when I should have been liking girls. Nico, no, just let me finish. You were always there to save me. It was frustrating, but I would be lying again if I said I wasn't happy to see your face every time you got me out of trouble. You weren't that hero I saw as a kid anymore. You were a different one. You make mistakes, but you keep fighting. You keep trying to be my friend, even though everyone probably thinks you're crazy for it. And I know you don't want it, but everyone looks up to you, and they're right to do it, because you would never lead them wrong. You would never turn evil like Luke. You would never betray someone you cared about. And that's why I gave up.
Percy, who had been blushing with embarrassment, blinked in confusion.
Gave up?
Nico hesitated, like he hadn't meant to add that last part.
When we were in the labyrinth and we started getting along again, I thought maybe, but then I saw how much you liked Annabeth. But I still thought that if I showed you I wasn't mad at you, I guess, then maybe you would like me back.
He said quietly.
But it didn't take long for me to see that Annabeth is who you love. Aphrodite was right. I helped as much as I could because it was the right thing to do, but also because I wanted to help you. I didn't expect anything back, though. I still don't. She was right about me, but she was wrong about us.
Percy could actually feel his heart breaking, and his own self-hatred was swelling.
Nico, if I had known... What?
He asked, finally turning around to look at Percy. There was no anger in his voice, just sorrow.
You would have broken up with Annabeth for me? Percy, I knew it was hopeless, and that's why I gave up, and why I never told you. I was ready to live with it. You were happy, and I wasn't going to mess with that. I'm still not really comfortable with that part of myself, so who knows? Maybe I never would have said anything anyway. When I heard you two broke up, I just wanted to see if you were okay.
He sighed and turned back around.
Now we're in this mess.
You were checking up on me? Percy asked.
Yeah, sorry about that. No, it's okay,
he replied. Percy felt like an idiot. He knew he had a bad habit of slipping into tunnel vision and forgetting to think about the people around him, but there was no excuse for this. He had never forgotten Nico, but he obviously had never been paying any real attention. It was in that moment that Nico D'Angelo took on a quality of selflessness that awed him. How could he think anything else when he just heard that Nico had been suffering in silence and was prepared to do it forever? He couldn't have done it. When he thought Annabeth had feelings for Luke, he'd gotten angry and snapped at her about it. And Annabeth had been downright unpleasant to Rachel until she became the Oracle. Even though their relationship had crumbled a few months ago, he doubted very much that either of them could have just turned away forever, even to make the other one happy. Percy reached over and put a hand on Nico's shoulder. "Thank you," he said with genuine gratitude. "For what?" Nico asked. His voice gave nothing away. "For telling me, for what you did during the wars, for everything. And I'm sorry I never said it enough." Percy gave his shoulder a little squeeze, happy that Nico had even allowed him to touch him. He would never be able to repay him, but maybe he could undo some of the damage he'd caused. He would most definitely never ignore Nico again. He saw Nico nod his head a little, and then he pulled away. "I know it's none of my business, but will you tell me what happened between you and Annabeth?" he asked. Nico lay back down and faced him this time. "Yeah, He stopped to think about how to start this. It was hard to talk about Annabeth, but he wouldn't refuse after what Nico just shared with him. "It started off with her just wanting to check out New Rome," he said. "She liked it, of course, and it's not like I didn't. I'd always thought we would go live there one day, but I don't know. At first I felt like I had to help rebuild here, you know?" "Yeah," Nico said. "I didn't feel right just leaving after this place was wrecked in the battle. And she was all for it, being an architect at heart. She even helped. But after that was over, I remembered my promise to Hermes, and so that took over. At first it was me, Leo, and Grover. Then Jason came to live here, and he started helping. After we rescued the fourth child of Hermes, Annabeth started asking me about moving to New Rome again. We were talking about it, and I was wondering if I shouldn't just finish high school at Goody, and she was trying to talk me out of it." He sighed and scratched his head in annoyance. "I'm listening," said Nico. "Yeah, she was trying to convince me to go to school in New Rome with her. Then Calypso told Leo that she'd bought some property and wanted his help opening a garage. She's turned into a real gearhead thanks to him. Grover wanted to go back to organizing the protection of the wild places too, so I kind of volunteered to stay on board with Jason and find the remaining F-Bloods without talking about it with her first." He pursed his lips as he recalled how well that decision went over. "She was furious. All of my IMs went unaccepted. She didn't speak to me for 2 weeks, and then she finally came back to see me. We talked, and she accused me of creating excuses to keep from moving to New Rome with her. And you know what? She was right. I could have gone. Their education is tailored to half-bloods, so I might have even done better in school there. And there are plenty of young demigods dying for a quest who could have gone with Jason. He sighed again, remembering the conversation. "I couldn't go. I didn't want to. I loved Annabeth, but I wasn't ready. Everything felt like it was moving too fast and I couldn't keep up, or maybe I was too scared to try. She was so understanding about it, and that made me feel worse. She said we were growing apart, and we just agreed that it was over. I thought something must be wrong with me. I was the one who brought up the idea of New Rome, and then I ran from it." They were quiet for a while before Nico spoke up tentatively. "Do you think maybe it was Aphrodite?" "I wondered that when this started, but I don't know. It felt like me. Like I was making my own choices, but I guess you don't know when you're being influenced," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe you two will work it out when you're ready," said Nico gently. It surprised Percy given the situation and Nico's feelings, but he couldn't see Nico trying to use this information to his advantage. "Thanks, but I doubt it. I let her down. I can't really describe it, but something feels broken between us now. Maybe that's Aphrodite's doing." He yawned. "We should get some sleep. We don't know what the next trial is," Nico said, and then he yawned too, catching it from Percy. "Yeah," he breathed and then closed his eyes. He felt better getting that story off of his chest. He hadn't talked about it with anyone, not even his mom or Grover. Nico was a good listener. He was patient and didn't push, and he felt safe telling Nico because he knew he could keep a secret. They fell asleep, not even noticing that they were facing each other this time. The next morning felt different. Percy could tell that the tension between them had eased immensely. Nico was quiet, but his silence didn't carry any of the angry weight that it used to. They walked to breakfast, and Nico would smile faintly or laugh softly whenever something funny was said, and it made Percy happy. The Aries kids seemed to have given up trying to antagonize them, but he noticed the dirty looks and ignored them. "Comic books? Cool. Percy said, nodding as he smeared strawberry cream cheese over half a bagel.
Yeah, I just got curious, especially with all these superhero movies coming out. Hazel dragged me to see the Avengers, and that started it. You should try watching Young Justice, too. I mean, I'm not a big fan of reading, so I usually just watch the cartoons, but you'd probably like it, too. It's funny. You could come over one day and watch it with me. Yeah, maybe I will,
Nico said lightly and poked around his fruit salad before spearing a cherry. His cheeks were a little pink, and he was wearing that faint smile. Percy felt a little surge of pride, like he used to get when he'd say something right and Annabeth would smile at him. That was immediately followed by guilt. He shouldn't be happy when he knew these trials would probably leave Nico with a broken heart all over again. He couldn't give the boy what he wanted, so he needed to watch himself from now on. There's Justice League, too. Maybe we should have Superhero Day at my house. He laughed and went back to eating. After breakfast, they went chariot racing against a couple of Apollo kids. Percy drove while Nico made undead warriors pop out of the ground in front of the other chariot. He made them swing their swords at the wheels and summoned black walls of stone to block the percussion arrows being fired at them. Finally, the zombies succeeded in destroying one of the wheels on the shiny sun chariot, and the Apollo kids lost control. They had to bail while their horses panicked and the ruined chariot flipped and bounced. It was the easiest win Percy had ever had at chariot racing, and probably the most fun. He whooped and hugged Nico before coming to his senses and letting go. Nico flushed all the way to his ears, and Percy wasn't able to completely suppress his laugh. Back in the cabin, he was still grinning like an idiot. Nico climbed under the sheets, but Percy was sitting on his knees on the bed like a little kid. If I had teamed up with you when Tantalus was here, we would have claimed Clarice. It's not that big of a deal, but thanks, said Nico, squirming under his praise. Yeah, it is, he insisted. Look, the Aphrodite and Ares kids are going to be all over camp with this love trials thing, and I know how sensitive you are about... Nico's face darkened, but Percy kept going. There's so much more to you than that, and we're all going to be in your corner. And I think a lot of the other campers might surprise you. Yeah, sure, said Nico in a sullen voice, his face a blank mask. I'm sure it'll help me make tons of friends when everyone finds out I'm an even bigger Don't! Said Percy firmly. No, never. I already told you there's nothing wrong with you, and I'm not going to listen to you say things like that. Nico looked sad and slightly surprised at Percy's words, but he didn't argue. I think you're great the way you are, and I know Hazel and Jason feel the same way. I just don't understand why you can't see it, he said honestly. Anyway, we better go to sleep, he said, getting up, just in case there's another trial. He flipped the light off and used the soft glow of the saltwater fountain to find his way back to the bed. Good night, he said. Good night, Nico replied, but Percy had a feeling it would be a while before the younger boy actually fell asleep. Percy woke up with Nico's hair tickling his nose. He was lying really close to him with an arm flung around Percy's waist. He must have moved in his sleep. Percy blushed a little bit at their proximity, but he didn't really mind so much. Still, Nico would probably freak out if he woke up in that position, so Percy carefully moved backwards. He had only just managed to untangle them and sit up when Nico opened his eyes. Hey, Nico said sleepily, looking at him through half-closed lids. He had a small smile on his lips. Percy raised his eyebrows in surprise, but smiled back nonetheless. Good morning, he said. Ready to get up? Nico yawned and sat up in the bed. I guess I have to, if you're going to, he said. Let's go shower. Percy blinked. Nico must be really sleepy if he didn't get the implications of what he'd just said. He followed Nico into the bathroom. Do you want to go first? It's fine. Go ahead, Nico said, sitting down at the same spot he had the day before with his back turned. Still, Percy felt more uncomfortable about the whole thing than he had yesterday. He wasn't sure why, but he had a feeling Nico stole glances at him while he showered, even if he didn't actually catch him doing it. Percy kept the shower as short as possible and quickly got dressed. Nico's face was slightly red as he moved to take his turn. All right, ready, Nico said after a while, and Percy got up from the floor, turning around. His eyes widened in surprise as he realized Nico was still naked from the waist up. He was giving Percy a sheepish grin while drying his hair with a towel. I forgot to bring a shirt. He shrugged and moved past Percy, presumably to go get one. Percy tried not to stare at Nico's naked back as he followed. The boy was skinny, but more fit than Percy had thought. Still, something felt off. Are you okay? Percy asked uncertainly, and Nico gave him a surprised look. I'm fine. Why? he said, frowning slightly as he bent down to pick up a shirt from the floor.
You seem different.
Happier, I guess, Percy said. Nico rolled his eyes as he pulled the shirt down over his head.
And that's a bad thing? He asked. I don't know. I feel good. I guess talking to you yesterday helped.
Percy nodded. That made sense. Nico had bottled his feelings up for a long time, after all.
Glad I could help.
Nico gave him a brief smile.
Come on, let's go eat breakfast.
As they sat down at the Poseidon table, Percy saw that Nico had actually picked some bacon as well as fruit for his breakfast for once. That was good. He just hoped the sudden change of diet wouldn't give the boy stomach cramps.
Do you think we'll get the day off? Percy asked. You know, from trial business?
Nico finished chewing his bacon before answering.
I don't think they will bother us today.
Based on what?
Percy frowned. They've been running us pretty hard since this whole thing started. It's just a feeling.
Nico shrugged.
Today was a good day. Nothing bad is going to happen.
Percy stared at him in surprise, then laughed.
I never thought I'd hear you being more optimistic than me. Things change,
Nico said dismissively, finishing his meal.
Now, what do you want to do?
At Percy's suggestion, they joined the usual camp activities after breakfast. Nico hadn't even protested against it, which felt a bit weird. Percy suspected he was making a conscious effort to be more positive, so he didn't call him out on it. It was a good thing, right? It was still a bit uncomfortable when they were climbing up the lava wall, and Nico stayed right beneath him the whole time. They had to stay close because of the invisible tether, but there was room enough for him to the side. When Percy pointed it out, Nico actually laughed.
Just enjoying the view,
he said, and Percy almost lost his grip in surprise. He blushed deeply as he collected himself and continued climbing. Since when did Nico say stuff like that? Since today, apparently. It wasn't long before he realized the boy was actively flirting with him. Nico grabbed his hand when they walked somewhere.
Just so we don't accidentally get too far away from each other.
Physically corrected Percy's grip on the bow during archery and stood so close to him in the lunch line that he would have been breathing down Percy's neck had he been a few inches taller. Not to mention the little comments he made, small compliments and suggestions that made Percy blush. Nobody else seemed bothered by it. They didn't even seem to notice the change. Percy was honestly flattered, but also starting to get a bit freaked out by the whole thing. The whole thing culminated in the evening during Capture the Flag. Nico and Percy were guarding their team flag since they had limited mobility due to their bond.
Do you think anyone's even going to dare attack us?
Percy asked after a long while of silence.
Nico shrugged. Considering Jason's at Camp Jupiter right now, I rather doubt the other team will be brave enough without him.
He said.
He is? That explains why I haven't seen him,
Percy said, surprised.
When did he leave? Last night. He told us about it, remember?
Nico said, raising an eyebrow at him. Percy frowned. He couldn't remember that at all, but Nico sounded so certain. Maybe he had just forgotten about it?
So,
Nico said, taking a step closer to Percy.
We're going to be waiting here for a while, and it will probably be boring. We should find a way to entertain ourselves.
He reached out to touch Percy's face. For a second, Percy was stunned enough to let him. Then he grabbed Nico's hand and brought it away.
Stop it! What's wrong with you?
He said, and Nico frowned.
There's nothing wrong with me. You said so yourself. Nico said, why are you fighting this? What are you talking about?
Percy asked.
This, us. We're meant to be together. That's what this is all about. Nico said, it's going to happen eventually. Why are you fighting it? Nico, I told you how I feel about this, and about you.
Percy said uncertainly.
I don't like you that way. You would, if you gave it a chance. Nico said, you know you would. That's what frightens you, isn't it?
Percy hesitated, unsure how to respond. He had never been so thankful for getting attacked as he was in that moment. 4 younger demigods jumped out from behind the bushes, taking them by surprise. Percy defeated his 2 easily and without harming them, but Nico was ruthless, causing a lot of bruises and possibly breaking an arm.
You didn't need to do that,
Percy told him afterwards when they were walking back to the cabin.
I've seen you fight. You could have disarmed them easily. Well, I was angry,
Nico said, like that made it okay. Percy frowned.
You were angry with me. You shouldn't have taken it out on them. Whatever,
Nico muttered.
Let's go to sleep.
After changing into his sleepwear, Percy hesitated. He suddenly felt uncomfortable with the thought of sleeping next to Nico. For the first time, he wasn't sure that Nico wouldn't do something. make something happen. Percy didn't know how he felt about that. A little frightened, maybe. Was Nico right? Was he just afraid that he might actually fall for Nico if he gave it a chance? As it turned out, Nico did something before they even got that far. He came up to Percy, looking like he was going to start their earlier discussion again, then leaned in and pushed their lips together. Percy was too stunned to react, and Nico didn't pull back. If anything, the kiss became more aggressive. The boy pushed himself against Percy, who backed up until his back hit the wall. Nico followed, more or less pinning him against the wall. Percy didn't know what to do, couldn't think, but his body seemed to make the decision by itself. Slowly, he started to return the kiss. As far as kisses go, it really wasn't bad, but Percy was too confused to truly enjoy it. He wasn't sure this was something he wanted, and if he did, was it just physical? He knew it was more than that to Nico, but he was still surprised Nico had taken the step. Percy hadn't thought he would. He wouldn't! The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. All the flirting, the positive attitude, the disregard for other people's feelings. Suddenly, it all made sense. Percy forcefully pushed the boy away from him. "You're not Nico!" he said, certain of it, even if the boy's hurt expression looked exactly like the son of Hades.
Percy, what are you talking about?
He asked.
Of course I am.
"You're not!" Percy insisted. "This is a trial, isn't it? Where is the real Nico?"
You're not making any sense.
The boy tried, but it seemed pretty half-hearted. "Drop the act," Percy said angrily. "Who are you?" The boy was silent for a moment, then frowned.
I am what you wanted me to be, he said bitterly. I'm confident and have accepted myself. I'm Nico as he should be.
"No, you're not. Nico is Nico as he should be," Percy said. "He's selfless and kind, and you're not. He would never have tried to force himself on me like that."
You liked it.
"Not Nico's brat."
You wanted me. You've never wanted him.
Percy wanted to tell him that wasn't true, but it was in a way. This Nico had been too aggressive and made him uncomfortable, but he had also opened doors Percy hadn't even known were there. Percy hesitated.
See?
The boy said eagerly, almost begging.
It's better like this. Stay here with me. We could be happy together.
"I'm sorry," Percy said, feeling a bit bad about rejecting him, even if the boy didn't actually exist. "This isn't real." The boy scowled at him.
Fine,
he said angrily.
You're a sap anyway. I could do better.
Percy opened his mouth to reply, but the cabin started spinning and dissolved before his eyes, turning everything to darkness. When Percy opened his eyes, he was lying on his back, looking up at Jason's and Chiron's concerned faces. "Thank the gods you're awake! Finally!" Jason said. Percy groaned as he sat up. "What happened?" "We don't know," Chiron said. "You've been asleep for the whole day, and we couldn't wake you up. We assumed it was part of a trial, as it happened to both of you." Percy looked down beside him and saw Nico lying there, deep asleep. The real Nico. Percy gently reached out to touch his face, but Nico didn't react. "Come on, Nico," Percy said. "Whatever's happening, it's not me. Wake up!" Nico didn't react.
It barely took him a day to realize it wasn't real. That's the power of a true love,
said Aphrodite, bouncing on her feet.
"Before you get all excited, let me remind you that the trial is only half done. The son of Hades may yet succumb to the illusion,"
Hera said, ignoring her antics.
"He won't. I have every confidence he will see through it soon."
"Perhaps, and perhaps not. We shall see,"
said Hera, crossing her arms. The sharp buzzing sound of the alarm clock was the worst scare he had ever experienced. It was like having the monster under your bed blow an air horn in your ear. His eyes shot open, and he groaned and hit the reset button, then pulled the sheets over his head, trying to slow his heart down and go back to sleep. He knew that wouldn't be allowed to happen when he heard his bedroom door open. "Nico, get up! You make us late every morning!"
"Coming,"
he snapped. He heard his sister growl in annoyance and slammed the door, but he threw the sheets back and sat up. The noise of Washington, D.C. was almost constant. He could hear the distant sounds of cars from people in their early morning commute, heavy machinery from construction, the air-slicing roar of jets overhead, and his mother singing in the kitchen below. He got out of bed and picked up the components of his school uniform where he'd thrown them on the floor. He'd showered the night before, and the nice thing about waking up late is that he didn't have to fight Bianca for the bathroom sink in the mornings. He brushed his teeth and headed downstairs, dragging his backpack on the floor behind him. He smiled as he moved closer to the singing. His mother was a morning person, unlike him, and she sang every morning. It was the only good thing about waking up, in his opinion. He rounded the corner into the kitchen and saw her carrying 2 plates of French toast to the table. She was already dressed for work under her apron in a tasteful navy blue dress that silhouetted her figure and fell to the top of her knees, functional heels, and her pearls, which she wore almost every day. Her thick black curls were pulled into a bun at the back of her head, and her makeup was simple because she didn't need much. His mother worked in the Italian embassy. Her father had been ambassador before he retired and died, and she hoped to follow in his footsteps soon. It was hard because she would often have to leave for Italy. If he and Bianca were on holiday from school, they got to go with her. They were both born in Venice, like their mother, but rarely got to see it. Her job forced her to roam and back with little time in between. Still, when she was around, she insisted on being there for them. She made them breakfast, because her job sometimes prevented her from making dinner, helped with homework, and drove them to school. "Buongiorno, tesoro," she said and smiled at him. Bianca blew past him to the table, but he went straight to his mother for a hug. He didn't know why, but the scent of her made him sad and happy at the same time. She pulled him to her, and he buried his face in her shoulder and inhaled her scent. Why did he feel like crying? "You'd better go eat before your sister finishes it all," she laughed, and he let go. The car ride was noisy, with Bianca switching stations whenever one went to commercial, but he had the back seat all to himself to think. His name was Nico D'Angelo. He'd went to Edmundburg School. His mother is Maria D'Angelo. His sister is Bianca. He had a best friend named Jason Grace. He knew all of that, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that he was forgetting something important. He looked around at the city with its busy streets and historical landmarks and buildings. It all seemed familiar and unfamiliar. They pulled up to the school, and Bianca kissed their mother quickly and bailed, heading straight to where her friends were standing. Nico leaned over the seat and gave his mom a kiss on the cheek. "Have a good day, Nico," she said, smiling. He smiled back and had to force himself out of the car. He wanted to stay with her. He had this groundless urge to protect her, but he knew that was silly, so he got out and headed for the gates. The concrete pathways that cut through the lawn were busy with students making their way to their first class, but no amount of tardiness would make them foolish enough to tread on the grass. To everyone else, it probably seemed like a normal day. It was early, so the sky was still clinging to that pale white morning color it had before shifting into baby blue, and there was a little breeze blowing. You would bet a lot of the kids would be eating lunch outside today. He glanced around as he walked, trying to take everything in. It was like walking through a dream, where you know exactly what something is, even though you've never seen it before. He was restless, borderline anxious. He didn't know why, but he felt like he had more important things to do, and he really, really didn't want to be here. Ever. But all kids felt that way about school, right? He jogged up the steps and inside the building to head for class. He had English first, and he should be busy trying to mentally prepare himself for the imminent frustration brought on by his dyslexia. He turned left and walked down the hallway that led to his classroom, and was just wondering where Jason was when the door to the storage room opened and a hand shot out and grabbed him. He was hauled into the tiny dark space, too surprised to shout, and the door was shut. He was about to panic until the light came on. Percy was wearing his school uniform, albeit rebelliously. His jacket was nowhere to be seen, his vest wasn't buttoned, his shirt was untucked, and somehow it was sexy. He was smirking at Nico, and there was mischief in those sea-green eyes. He was the boy Nico had been crushing on since 6th grade, when he was just starting junior high, and Percy, the cool 8th grader, had to give Nico's group a tour of the school. So what was it? What was wrong with this picture? "Percy," the older boy was on him before he could say any more. Percy's mouth covered his as he backed Nico up until they bumped into the shelves behind them, causing the various cleaning products to rattle. The thought of pushing him away never even entered Nico's mind. On the contrary, his arms came up and wrapped around Percy's neck, and he kissed back just as passionately. He could have stayed there all day, but the feeling of Percy's hands on his hips, and the way he would lick Nico's bottom lip before snaking his tongue into his mouth. The bell rang, and they stopped, but didn't let go of each other. "Hey," said Percy, grinning down at him with those eyes. "Hey," he whispered back. "We'd better go before—" The door opened, and Percy pulled away from him quickly. It was Jason, frowning at them in clear disgust. Percy only smirked back at him, and Nico knew he just looked incredibly guilty. "You might want to shut the door,"
Percy said. Why? Afraid someone will see you in here and go running back to Annabeth?
Jason derided. The smirking stopped, and Percy looked at Jason seriously.
I'm more worried about Nico. You and I are graduating, and he'll be here all alone. So go ahead, out him. I guess you don't care that you won't be around to protect him. High schoolers can be pretty mean.
They stared at each other, and the tension mounted between them. Nico didn't know what to say, but then again he had a feeling there was nothing he could say to ease this animosity. These two had a deep dislike for each other, and the fact that Nico was in love with Percy bothered Jason a lot. He sometimes wondered what it would be like if they got along, but that might actually be scarier. Finally, Jason reached in and pulled Nico out by his jacket and slammed the door with Percy still inside. They went down the hall, Jason stomping and Nico trying not to blush while he tugged his jacket back into place.
Go to class,
said Jason tightly. Nico looked, and they were in front of the door to his English class.
We'll talk later.
He continued down the hall, and Nico went to the room and took his seat. He didn't need Jason chiding him like he was his father. Thinking of his father gave him a strange and foreboding feeling, but he couldn't understand why. His father had been a doctor in Venice who died when he was 3. No, something whispered in the back of his mind, and suddenly Nico thought, he'll be disappointed if I don't wake up. Nico! He turned his attention to the woman standing in front of him.
Yes, Miss Ashworth?
The entire class was looking at him, which was in direct contradiction with his life mission to avoid public awkwardness. I asked you to read the paragraph on page 273 out loud, she said expectantly. Nico realized that he had never even taken his textbook out, and the rest of the students began to snicker as he hastily unzipped his backpack, his previous thoughts forgotten. Most of the other kids were outside eating at the picnic tables, just as he predicted, but he and Jason stayed inside, especially since Percy headed out there with a group of his friends and had his arm wrapped around Annabeth's waist. Jason still looked angry, and Nico could probably guess having 2 classes with Percy is what kept him from calming down. He wasn't speaking to Nico either, and had barely made eye contact with him since he sat down at the table.
Jason, look, I don't understand why you're so mad,
Nico said, finally losing his patience with the silent treatment.
And I don't understand why you're so okay letting him use you like that,
said Jason in an exasperated tone.
Nico, you're so much better than that. He does this to you all the time. Teases you, gets your hopes up, and then goes back to his girlfriend like nothing ever happened. He's a pig.
Jason concluded and started picking the pepperonis of his pizza.
You don't know him. He cares about me. He faltered, unsure of how to defend his position. He just can't accept the fact that he isn't interested in the girl on his arm. He's with her in public and hides you away like a dirty little secret. He's a self-hating douchebag. And you're probably just jealous of him.
The look of shock on Jason's face made him regret that.
Why can't you just let me have this?
Nico asked piteously. Jason pushed his tray away and turned to look at Nico.
We've known each other a long time. You trusted me with your secret, and I would never tell. And of course I want you to find a guy and be happy, but Nico, this isn't it. He's taking advantage of your feelings. He's been doing it since that day he caught you staring at him. I just can't stop thinking that he's a good person,
said Nico, and Jason closed his eyes in silent annoyance.
I don't know what it is, but I get this feeling that I can trust him. You think I'm crazy, don't you?
He asked sadly.
No, I just think you're in love with this idea of Percy, not the real one.
He mulled over Jason's words for the rest of the day, and he felt conflicted. Percy paid no attention to him since the storage closet moment. He could see Jason had a point, but it warred in his mind with his firm beliefs that Percy was worthy of his affection. But there was also that lingering feeling that he was forgetting something. It was all starting to make his head hurt, and he was happy when school was over for the day. It was a rare day when their mother was off in time to pick them up, and he crawled into the back seat gratefully.
"How was school?"
asked Maria.
"Boring, mostly,"
mumbled Nico.
"I got an A on my essay,"
Bianca squealed. Nico pretty much tuned them out as Bianca explained her essay, and his mother gushed. At dinner, he just picked at his tortellini and claimed to have a stomachache when his mother asked if he was okay. He went to his room and turned down the TV, but he was just flipping channels aimlessly. His mind was still full of nagging questions about Percy. He banged his head against his mattress and decided to watch some cartoons, but then there was a knock at his door.
"Come in,"
His sister walked into the room and smiled at him before sitting down on the bed. She looked so much like their mother, and he didn't know why that meant so much to him. He stayed where he was, lying on his back. Bianca was obstructing his view of the television, so he just looked at the ceiling. Is something wrong? You barely ate anything, and usually you devour Mom's tortellini.
I'm okay.
He lied. It's that Percy guy again, isn't it? He turned his head to look at her disapproving expression, but went back to studying the ceiling within seconds. Nico, you know it would be better if you could get over this problem. You'd be happier crushing on girls. His heart dropped into his stomach, and tears began to prickle his eyes.
I wish I could,
he said softly. It's just a phase. It'll pass, Bianca assured him, and he was sure he would be crying soon. His own sister! What would his mom think?
Yeah, listen, I need to sleep. I'll probably feel better in the morning,
he said, avoiding eye contact. Bianca said goodnight and kissed his cheek, but it felt like an empty gesture. When the door closed behind her, a tear streaked down his cheek. He couldn't remember ever feeling so lost. His cell phone started singing on the nightstand, and when he picked it up, there was a picture of Percy on the screen, and his heart stopped.
Hello?
You busy?
Asked Percy. I'm outside in front of your neighbor's driveway.
Sneak out and we'll go somewhere, he said.
I don't think I can,
said Nico uncertainly. Of course you can. It's not a big deal. I'll have you back before they notice.
I just don't think it's a good idea.
Please, Nico. I miss you. Dealing with Jason and his sister had weighed him down like an anchor, and hearing those words from Percy dragged him up from the depths. His resolve crumbled, and he agreed. Bianca was in her room, and he slipped out of his, quietly shutting the door as softly as possible. He could hear his mom in her office talking on the phone, and so he headed for the back door through the laundry room. Relief washed over him when he made it outside without getting caught, but he moved quickly. He stopped at the end of their driveway, and looking left to right, he finally spotted a car with someone in it waving and ran for it. Percy was smiling at him when he opened the door and got in. I knew you could do it, he said proudly.
Where are we going?
Nico asked.
To be alone for a little while,
Percy said and started the car. Bartholdi Park was more like a triangular-shaped botanical garden in the city. There was a greenhouse and a huge fountain in the center surrounded by plants and flowers. Nico had only ever been here once before on a field trip, and now he was making out with Percy on the ground under a tree. They started standing and then sitting. Now he was on his back with Percy on top of him, and somehow his fear of being seen had been lost in the transitions. It was a heady feeling having Percy on him like this with his fingers flitting everywhere. But there was something urgent about it too. Percy's lust was like a fever. Nico could feel it radiating off of him. Soon his wandering hands found the clasp of Nico's pants and began to tug at it.
Wait,
Nico said, pushing him back gently.
Why?
Asked Percy, leaning down to kiss him again, but Nico stopped him.
I don't think we should do that,
he said shyly.
Don't worry, I brought protection,
Percy said dismissively.
No, that's not. I just think it'll mean more to me than it will to you,
said Nico sadly. The surprise on Percy's face made him hopeful that he was wrong.
Well, what do you think it means?
Percy asked in confusion.
That I mean something to you. That you love me?
He said hopefully.
Nico, don't be so serious. It's just sex.
He moved to restart their kiss, and Nico turned his face away.
Why are you still with Annabeth?
Nico asked.
You're not attracted to her, so why not be with me?
Percy sat back and looked down at him in disbelief.
What is this? Am I on trial here?
That word hung in the air between them, almost like Nico could see it written on the wind. Trial. Trial? The trials! It was like the right piece fitting into the right spot in his mind. That's what he'd forgotten. Everything. The truth. His heart thundered in his chest and panic coiled in his gut like an angry serpent. It wasn't real. None of it. He sat up and glared at the fake in front of him.
Where is Percy?
I'm right here, said fake Percy, looking perplexed and amused.
I mean the real Percy, Nico said. This isn't real.
Fake Percy looked sad and reached out to stroke Nico's cheek. Of course it's real. Don't I feel real? Nico pushed his hand away in revulsion.
This is a trial. It has to be. Percy would never act like you. He would never
touch you like that, finished fake Percy.
Yes, and my sister, Bianca, would never say those things to me. She knew. She knew how I felt, and it didn't bother her. She loved me anyway. Now answer me, who are you really?
All pretenses were gone, and he looked at Nico with no shame. Nico, I'm what you wanted in those dark moments when you wanted him so badly that it didn't matter if he was with Annabeth or not. Nico stared at him in shock. The worst part is that he couldn't deny it, but it wasn't as true now as it was before.
That was in the beginning, and it was selfish. I wanted him to be happy in the end.
And what about your happiness? Fake Percy moved closer. He sat between Nico's legs, and the look of sympathy he had on his face kept Nico from scrambling back away from him.
You know the truth. These trials won't help anything. He still loves Annabeth, and they'll probably get back together as soon as he changes his mind and wants to move to New Rome.
He leaned forward and rested his forehead against Nico's.
Stay with me, he whispered. At least with me we can have something, more than what he's willing to give you. And your family is here.
Nico felt so mad, but he didn't know who he was angrier with right now. Hera and Aphrodite, this thing trying to seduce him, or himself for falling for this trick. It made him feel weak, and he hated it.
Get away from me!
He shoved the fake Percy away and got to his feet.
Go back then!
Fake Percy said, glaring at him from the ground.
You'll be miserable in the end, and you know it! He'll never accept you!
He said viciously. The world began to spiral, and for a second, Nico felt dizzy enough to pass out.